two things come to mind. One is, I think over the next 10 years, re-entry is going to be the next big thing. And so how do we manufacture things in space and then bring them back? Varda's doing some groundbreaking work with pharmaceuticals. I think we're going to start to see that move forward. There's been a lot of talk about light manufacturing, fiber optics, for example, other pieces that do it in space, bring it down. When we see the new space stations get established, I think that's going to start to grow. But it'll be crewed and uncrewed operations. But 10 years from now, when we sit down and talk, I think we're going to have seen much of that starting to move forward in real economic ways.
This is, as I told you earlier, my favorite kind of interview where I get to just kind of pick your brain and just kind of absorb your expertise. And given your perspective, you've got to have a lot of thoughts on everything that's happening right now. So maybe we start with spaceports. And capacity being an issue, we hear about it all the time. We need more spaceports. We need more capacity at spaceports. But also the paradigm of what spaceports are is shifting. Just some ideas that were floating in my head. I'd love to get your thoughts.
Yeah, sure. Access to space starts at spaceports. And we definitely need more of them. If we look at what we have today, and I'll focus more on vertical because that's really where the market is right now.
Yep.
But horizontal will be in the future, and there's a lot of great opportunities there. But there's really only 5 places to go to space from the U.S. vertically. Boca Chica is SpaceX, so that's their private site. But then we've got Vandenberg and Cape Canaveral, which everyone knows is federal sites. And then Wallops and Kodiak are the other two. So state-owned, both been around for quite some time and really complement the federal thing. So we already have a start of this model of how do we start to build out a network of spaceports, a lot like a network of airports.
Yep.
And so that's where I see things developing is not in isolation, but a diverse set of spaceports that can meet a growing need of operations. So, we're starting to see re-entries starting to happen, and people are looking, okay, well, how do I make this work? How do I do this in the U.S.? And we got some open space out west, but some companies are now going to Australia.
Yes.
And so, right, so there's a good collaboration now that's broadening out internationally as well.
And I know that there are always some challenges in establishing new spaceports. Those challenges are numerous. I feel like I don't even need to get into those because there's so many. But I feel like in response to some of those challenges, again, how people are trying to establish new spaceports is also shifting. I'm thinking of one company that's potentially trying to move spaceports out to sea, which I think is a really interesting development. Just thoughts on maybe alternatives and things that we can do to open up capacity?
Yeah, so spaceports, I think, by definition, start with launch.
Yeah.
And sometimes launch can be aspirational in the future, but it still is a core of where you launch or re-enter from. But what we're seeing is spaceports really need a diverse set of revenue streams, and that's like any business, right? And so you start to think about what other things can a spaceport do that brings an economic powerhouse to that community, and brings value to the industry, and brings jobs, and really creates this growing space economy. So if I think about up at Kodiak, not only were we supporting government and commercial launches up there, but there was deployable telemetry antennas. So when a customer like Rocket Lab needed some temporary telemetry capabilities while they were first starting out, Alaska deployed their antennas down to New Zealand and supported their initial operations. And then they went to autonomous flight termination, and Alaska was able to bring this back. So it was a good, opportunity for a new rocket company and a good opportunity for a spaceport to bring in some diversified revenue as well. And we see those diversified revenue opportunities at a lot of different spaceports. Houston's a great example where launch is in the future. And they've got a great set of tenants. Arturo's done a great job of bringing in a diverse set that is space core, but it's not necessarily flight.
Yeah, that idea of making a spaceport, that economic hub, is really fascinating to me. And I feel like the many examples that I can think of that I've heard of over the years, they're very tailored to their location also, the customer and the location and what the sort of community needs. It's really just an interesting way of thinking of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Geography is key, right? I mean, to get to space, so the geography is key for safety and for physics, but also what the community is willing to support, right? Sometimes that's easier than other places, and you got to balance all of that. Also having an anchor, for example, if you've got a government agency or another academic institution that you can anchor operations to, that's great. Down in Houston is Johnson Space Center, so that's a great natural connection with human spaceflight. Alaska takes advantage of its geography of being on the north side of the Pacific Ocean, big open azimuth for launches, and so you got to look for those opportunities that present themselves.
I'm curious. We've been talking a lot about U.S. spaceports. I'm curious your thoughts on the global growth of spaceports. Yeah, you mentioned Australia. It's a great example. I'm thinking also the U.K. and Europe, India. There's a lot of examples. Just thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. What I'm seeing is much larger growth overseas than in U.S. domestic market, and that makes sense, right? We're further along in the U.S. than other countries for the most part, so you would expect that growth to happen. We're seeing almost spaceports pop up almost any place. There's a contingent here from Nigeria who is looking to build a spaceport. That's exciting.
That's cool.
Australia you mentioned. New Zealand already has a spaceport. And the UK. The one thing from a U.S. perspective that's an encumberment is the MTCR, right? So export control. So Missile Technology Control Regime. Sorry for the acronym.
ITAR, the whole world.
But it plays, right? It plays as part of how we can, export rockets overseas, and also companies support spaceports. You got to be careful about, because that is an export as well. But countries, a number of our allied countries already have agreements with the U.S., so we can make those exports. I see that expanding in the next several years, because that diversity is important not only for our economy, but for national security. Got to be mindful. These are, big delivery systems. So
absolutely, and as more we want space to be global, as more nations, build out their space capabilities, it just makes sense that infrastructure needs to follow. Completely shifting. Just thoughts. As I said, I kind of want to go down the rabbit hole with you. Your thoughts on what's different things going on in the space industry. So, if you were to sort of pluck an idea out of the ether of what's interesting you right now in the space industry, I'm just curious where you would go with that.
Yeah. So I think two things come to mind. One is, I think over the next 10 years, re-entry is going to be the next big thing. And so, how do we manufacture things in space and then bring them back? Varda's doing some groundbreaking work with pharmaceuticals. I think we're going to start to see that move forward. There's been a lot of talk about light manufacturing, fiber optics, for example, other pieces that do it in space, bring it down. When we see the new space stations get established, I think that's going to start to grow. But it'll be crewed and uncrewed operations. But 10 years from now, when we sit down and talk, I think we're going to have seen much of that starting to move forward in real economic ways. The second part is the space community embracing other sectors. So space tends to be insular. We tend to think of ourselves as special. There's a lot of unique things, right? But there's many industries that have gone before us, aviation in particular, that's really adjacent. We can leverage those lessons learned already, like from airports, but other sectors as well, to then accelerate our movement forward. And I think if we miss out on that, we're just going to slow our pace. So in addition to how airports operate, and let's say how we can optimize spaceports, there's things like biofuels, so sustainable aircraft fuels on the aviation side. As we get more rockets, we're going to need to look at those type of sustainable bio type of fuels or something to sustain in a economic environmentally friendly way.
Of course, absolutely.
Right, a rocket. So there's when you think about bringing things down from space, biotech starts to play, and all those unique facilities and capabilities come into play.
Absolutely. Those are some opportunities. I'm going to do the whole opportunities challenge paradigm.
Okay.
So you mentioned some really good opportunities there. I'm curious about challenges that you see on the horizon that maybe are of concern or that you're keeping an eye on.
Yeah, so, they say space is hard, right? I mean, getting to space is definitely hard, right?
It's still early in the morning. Now I've heard that already.
Starting out early. But, this is not easy business, right? No. And when it goes south, it can be spectacular.
Yeah.
So while there's been a tremendous amount of progress and success, we still have some hurdles there. So that's a pacing function, right? When you look at some of the existing spaceports being underutilized, that's why, right? But it's also the business side, right? And so I think that's the other challenge is we certainly transitioned over into more of mainstream funding, which didn't exist back in the 90s when we thought commercial space was going to start to move forward. But money moves things forward in progress, and so keeping that flow of investment and showing investors how they can make money in space. Otherwise, they're going to divert their money into other sectors, which makes sense. So moving that forward. I think the third piece that comes to mind, going back to the export control, ITAR, is from a U.S. perspective, for us to move out into other parts of the world. Right, we need some of those barriers brought down so we can make that trade more free.
I have to ask the inevitable. We have a new presidential administration in. That always brings a lot of changes. I know the space industry is very hopeful that this will bring some positive change for us. Thoughts on maybe what you might see coming from that?
Yeah, I'm bullish on where we're headed over the next 4 years.
Yeah.
I'm excited about Jared Isaacman being the new NASA administrator. Yeah, I think he brings a lot of practical experience.
Yes.
He put his money where his mouth is, right?
Yes, very literally.
Yeah. And he's done a lot of good science in space already. So he's not just a tourist. So I think he understands that mission. He's an engineer. Yeah. So I'm excited where he's headed.
Yeah.
Putting a little more emphasis on Mars, it's not bad. So, I don't want to forget the moon. I think that's important, right? There's a lot of good resources there, a lot of good things to do there. And I think this president is focused on the economy and trade, has a style to him about how to negotiate. But I think the focus is for business and for the economy. So I think that's all good things.
Good for the space industry. Yeah, absolutely. Any other thoughts? Anywhere else you wanted to take me today as we go down the rabbit holes?
Yeah, I mean, if I were to circle back on some of that leveraging of a broader, where we've been in the past is good, right? We can learn a lot of lessons, and this industry stands on the shoulders of giants, if you will. But heading to the future, we're going to break some paradigms and to really broaden out a diverse set of spaceports. That's going to take a broader set of industry to go do that. I've been doing some work with Merrick and some of their work in other sectors in addition to aerospace, where they're doing biofuels, infrastructure and facilities, or biotech, or even nuclear handling, right? I mean, look at nuclear propulsion.
Hearing a lot at this conference this
week. Right, and so that's exciting to see. As we get more vendors here, you start to see, I need that, I need this. 5 years ago, maybe you didn't.
Yeah.
So I think leveraging this broader industrial base is going to strengthen space and accelerate that again.
I feel like I say this every day in this job, but it is a really exciting time to be in this world. I'm so glad I'm here. I'm so glad I get to talk to folks like you. So thank you for sharing your insights. Thanks for sitting down with me this morning.
Yeah, of course.
I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for taking me down the rabbit hole.